All right, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about CSS3 media queries. First of all, I want to just show you guys what the importance of a media query is, or what is the net effect of why we're going to talk about media queries. If you go to a site like usd.edu, and we've talked about or looked at throughout the semester our developer tools. And one of the handy features, and I can't recall if we've actually talked about it or not, so if we have, we'll just review it again real quick. If we open up our developer tools, then depending a little bit on what browser you're using, and I've got Firefox running here, we have, at least in Firefox, a responsive design mode, and I think most developer tools included with the browser have this. What this allows us to do, and this is very important because what we're going to start talking about with media queries is the ability to make responsive design. Responsive design then is a single website with a single code base that adapts to the device that it's on. That is, it looks good on a smartphone, it looks good on a tablet, and it also looks good on something larger, like our desktops, our laptops, or possibly even a television. And so we have responsive mode in our developer tools. And this responsive mode allows us to go in here and really test that responsiveness of our designs, of our site, just inside of the browser. And what's really handy about this is that not only do we have some features up above here, like the ability to set some custom breakpoints or custom design dimensions based off of devices and common device widths and height, but we also can drag and drop our design, or the window, the width and height of this window, without having to resize the entire browser. And so what is responsive design? Well, this site is a responsive site. And as you can see, that as we start to shrink the width, what we get is we get a restructuring of the content. And what's important about this restructuring is that everything stays on the screen. Everything stays and moves. I shouldn't say stays on the screen, but what it does is it doesn't, we don't lose stuff to the horizontal. Everything stacks responsively in the vertical. And so if we're looking at this on a device, maybe a tablet, maybe a smartphone, we don't have to go to left and right. We don't have to scroll on the horizontal. We simply scroll on the vertical, which is a very common practice to have with sites, because most of our sites, when we're looking at it on a smartphone or something small, the content's going to be much larger than what we have available on our screen. We're avoiding the user having to zoom in because the content fills in that screen, and we don't have to scroll to the horizontal. And so as we move this site down, you can see that everything adjusts, everything adapts, even the navigation. At some point, we go from having navigation here that we can see and we can click on to having a relatively standard, this is typically referred to as the hamburger, but having a relatively standard little indication or icon saying, here's our navigation, we can click that. One thing you'll notice when you're doing this is that oftentimes, most users are not gonna do this with your site. They're not gonna scroll through all these different widths, all these different breakpoints. They're just gonna open it up, and this is gonna be their smartphone, or this is gonna be their tablet, or this is gonna be their desktop, right? And so sometimes with your design, you'll get, and you'll probably notice it here a little bit, we get a little bit of like weird space. That is, that we're at sort of a weird dimension here, and we get a little bit of filler, where maybe this box right here, perhaps it should expand 100% to fill that in. Because when it gets all the way down to probably a phone size, you see that it does fill in, right? And again, part of that is just because this isn't how you develop a site, especially as something that's mobile responsive, is you're not worried about every single little breakpoint, or every single little dimension, every single pixel in between. You're looking at it at specifics. You're saying, okay, this is what it's going to look like on a phone, and then I'm going to choose a new breakpoint and say this is what it's going to look like on a tablet. Okay, maybe something a little bit larger on a tablet, and then this is finally what it's going to look like, on a monitor or something very large. Right. Now that doesn't mean that maybe the designers, the developers of this site didn't miss that. I don't know, maybe they should have gotten that. Maybe that's part of the original design. Regardless, it's just something to notice when you're starting to work with responsive design. It's very important to understand this with modern web application development, because this gives you the power to create a single site that looks good on every device. When we started working with mobile devices, one of the first things that the industry started to do was create two separate sites. And so you'd go to a website on a smartphone and you'd get a completely separate website. separate styles, separate rules, separate pages and everything. And that was okay. It gave us a mobile experience that was adapted to the mobile environment. But then we had 2 code bases, and oftentimes the clients then would have to spend money to have 2 additional sites being developed. And so this is a much, much more effective, much more seamless way to develop sites. Most website builders, most designers that are creating the mock-ups, creating the wireframes for sites, are going to include a responsive set of designs. They're going to say, here is what it should look like on a smartphone, here's what it should look like on a tablet, here's what it should look like on anything larger. And so it's a very common practice. What this also allows us to do, and we'll probably talk about this at the end of the course a little bit here, is Cordova or PhoneGap or hybrid applications. What this allows us to do is also wrap our websites in a way that they can look like native mobile applications. We can take a website that's mobile responsive, we can wrap it into a native Android or a native iOS app, remove the window, remove all the Chrome from the browser, and then put it in the App Store. And it'll look like it's an actual native application. And it'll behave in a lot of ways like it is. There's some differences there, definitely, and we'll talk about those a little bit more down the road. Okay, so how do we create... Oh, I meant to delete that slide. Blah, blah, blah. Let's just delete it. Okay, so how do we create, or what is a media query? It is in terms of how do we actually write the CSS rules in order to create our own media queries? Well, first of all, media queries were added in the CSS 3 specification. So much like topics that we've already started to cover in the past, we do need to be worried about browser compatibility. I've provided a link inside of our reading tab that will direct you to this page. W3 Schools, you'll probably have picked up by now that it's one of my kind of go-to sites for this type of information. A little bit about the history here. Here's an example. We'll get into these examples here in just a minute. But what I wanted to point out here was the browser support. Right, we're going to create this rule. This is what we're going to define in our CSS, and this shows you what browsers support it. So at this point in time, it's a pretty well supported part of the CSS specification as far as our browsers are concerned. We have 2 components then to a media query. First we have the @media, which is going to be what defines or what indicates to the browser as it's parsing that CSS that it is a media rule, a media query. From there we have 2 components then. We have the type, and then we have at least one expression. Okay, so the media type can be a variety of things. We can have all, we can have print, we can have screen, we can have speech, braille. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there. From a practical standpoint, I have never worked with anything but either screen or all. And a lot of developers, a lot of companies that I've worked with and continue to work with adopt the same thing. And so from a practical approach, you're probably going to see, much like the queries that we're going to look at today, you'll see that style. You'll see them written in that, and that they'll either use screen or they'll use all. When you use these different features, then what you're saying is these rules apply only to these devices. They apply only to print. They apply only to speech. They apply only to screen. And screen in this case is pretty much anything electronic. It's our laptop, desktop, tablets, phones, and so that's what makes it the standard. The media feature then is really where we spend most of our time writing the rule. And so the feature itself then is what allows us to define really what the property of the device that we're using. It allows us to select based off of that feature. And so we have things like width and height and orientation and resolution and all sorts of things. And so we take these 2 things, we combine them together, and we say, okay, when we're on a screen and the width is a certain width, or the height is a certain height, or the orientation is a certain orientation, then apply these rules. We have a variety of other media features that you can apply. And again, I will refer you to the documentation on this page, because not only does it give us the media types, and you can see that some of these are in fact deprecated. So here's all the media types. We can look at screen, used for computer screens, tablets, smartphones, etc. We also have media features, and there are quite a few media features here that you can scroll through these and look at these. The ones that you'll predominantly see are the width-based ones, right? Because width, when we're looking at a design, when we're looking at a site, how we're determining when to change our rules, how we're determining the type of device that we're on is based off of this width. And so as we change that width, right, that changes our styles. And so width is really the dominant one that we're going to use. There are others though. Orientation might be a handy one. Let's see, what else is there? Resolution. Right? Resolution might be another one. Right, so there's a lot. Point is, read through those refresher, get to a basic understanding of them, but we're going to spend most of our time looking at the width and maybe even the height, but predominantly the width. Okay. The thing with media features then is that we have essentially a basic condition. We have essentially a logical condition in that we're looking for something to either be true or to be false. And so the media feature itself is we're essentially asking the browser through that rule to say, okay, tell me something about the environment. If it's true, then that's a part of the true statement. We want that overall media rule to be true. If all conditions are true, then we apply that rule. If any condition is not true, then depending on how we add those conditions together, we have logical or, we have logical and, depending on how we add those conditions together, then it may or not be true. And so just like we have with if statements and the conditions that we put in while loops and for loops, we're asking the browser something about it, looking for a true or false, and then determining overall whether or not that media rule, that media query applies. And again, we'll look at some examples here. I think that'll make a lot more sense. All right, so here's an example. Here's a couple examples. There are a couple of ways in which we can write these media queries. The dominant way here is going to be in the style section. So we'll focus primarily on that. You can, however, as an author or as if you're looking at somebody else's code, you might see, keep in mind, recall that this is our way. This is the way in which we link to external style sheets. And so if we want to include this example.css style sheet, then we can add this media attribute. And that will say that if the max width is 800 pixels, then it'll include that file. So there has to be a maximum width. So what that is saying is that 800 pixels and below, it'll include that file, this style sheet. If the max width, if the width of the browser, the width of the window here goes beyond 800 pixels, then it doesn't include that. So those styles will not, whatever rules are written inside of here will not be applied. This is inside a style. And again, recall that there are three ways in which we predominantly include styles. We link to an external style sheet, we include style in the head section of our page, or we do it in line. The preferred method by large, is to include it in an external style sheet. And so we would link to the external style sheet, and then we would write the media queries inside of that style sheet, right? So you don't see a lot of media query attributes on, the link tag itself. We also don't write a ton of styles in the style tags inside of the head section of the document, because that limits the fact that those styles, those rules, only apply to that particular document. Putting them in an external style sheet allows any page on our website to include those rules, include those styles, and then use them. And so that's the predominant way. Now, for the example stuff we're going to look at, I am going to do them, in style tags in the head section, just to keep everything in one file, to hopefully make it a little bit easier to look at everything on one page. So this is the core of a media query. All right, we have the ampersand and the media, right? So the media keyword, and then after that we have the media device. Okay, and you'll see that it's absent here. And so when this is absent, then I believe all is the default. But let's just double check, because I don't want to give bad information. Of course it doesn't say. All right, so I'll have to get back to you on that. I do believe that all is the default. Okay, so you can exclude it, and then it takes on a default value, and then it additionally looks at one of those media features. So in this case, this media rule applies when the type was anything, and the maximum width is 600 pixels. We have curly brackets, and then everything that we write inside of that. So we're just defining CSS. We have selectors, we have the curly brackets, we have the properties. So we're defining rules, and we can define as many as we want. We can write whatever CSS we want as long as it's valid CSS. It just has to be inside these curly brackets, and this has to evaluate to true. What we're asking the browser is to say, okay, is the current width of the screen less 600 pixels or less? If it has a maximum, it has a maximum width of 600 pixels. If it goes beyond that, then this is false. If it's below that or equal to that, then it's true. As long as this is true, then it's going to apply these media queries. It's going to apply these rules to that browser, right? And so that's how we can change the styles, the behavior, the layout of the site based off of asking the browser questions about the current environment, writing media queries that allow us to detect when we're on a phone, when we're on a tablet, when we're on something larger. Okay, as I stated, we are going to work with some logical operators here because you can create complex media queries. Although again, it's not too common to see really complex queries. Most of the time, what you're looking at is something very similar to what we saw there. Something with a maximum width, for example. And we'll look at Bootstrap here in a few lectures, and we'll also talk about the Bootstrap's approach to their media queries, and that'll give you another better understanding into how the kind of the industry and the standard way of structuring these things within your CSS. So we have more logical operators. We have logical AND. And so if we want to make sure or check for multiple features to be true in one query, we can use the logical AND. That means that, again, each feature needs to return true. We're saying this media feature and this media feature and this media feature, and they all have to be true. We have not, and not negates an entire query. So, just like logical negation applies with our normal conditional expressions that we're working with in other languages, not does the same thing here. Only applies only if the entire query matches. So you must specify an explicit media type. So what you're saying, and we'll look at an example here, we'll say something like at media, only screen or only TV or only something. And what we're trying to do then is to create a rule that when all the media features match, it only applies to that media device or that media type. All right. You'll notice here that we don't have the logical OR. And so one thing that you're not going to see in your CSS using media queries is a media feature with OR in the keyword, that keyword OR in that query. And that is because you don't use it. In order to use an OR, you have multiple queries in a comma-separated list. And then if any value is true, the entire media statement is true. So it's just like a logical OR, except we don't use the OR keyword. We just separate the media features by a comma. Okay, so here we would have, let's see if I have an example. So here, as a few examples, if we look at this very last one, just because we just got done talking about that, you can see that we have the at media. We say min width of 700 pixels, comma, handheld and orientation landscape. All right, and so what this is saying then is that this condition needs to be true, or this and this condition needs to be true. All right. All right, so here's our media, at media. We have a min width of 700 pixels, and then we have whatever rules were defined there. So this is saying that it has to have a minimum width of 700 pixels. So what does that mean? That means that a minimum or greater than. Just has to have a minimum or greater than. And so we're looking at as it must be greater than or equal to 700 pixels. And that's probably the trickiest thing when starting to work with the logical conditions here, the logical operators and the conditions that you're setting, is just what does this stuff mean? We have min width of 700 pixels, so same condition as last, and the orientation needs to be landscape, right? So now we're using that logical AND. So the device has to both be a minimum width, so 700 pixels or greater, and the orientation needs to be landscape. And this becomes a handy feature when you start working with or supporting or doing something very unique to devices that can change their orientation, like a tablet and like a smartphone, right? Our desktops and our laptops are not too worried about that. I mean, of course, laptops can change their orientation physically, but we don't rotate the screens. Now, I guess some of them that have, swivel screens, that might be consideration, but by and large, I treat all laptops as the same, or all those larger screen devices the same. Okay, if for some reason you need to support a different media device, then you would say at media, and then whatever that device is, and we looked at those lists, right? So here, if we go back to this page, okay, this is the list of media types or devices, right? So if for some reason you need to support a different device, which again, I have found it to be very uncommon for me to need to support a different device, and the min width is 700 pixels, and the orientation is landscape. And so all three of these things must be true because we use the logical AND in order for these rules, this media query, to take effect. Okay, and then we talked about this one. This becomes logical OR. So you don't say min width 700 pixels or handheld and orientation. You say min width 700 pixels, comma, and then the next set of statement or statements that you want to support or have evaluated. Okay, one thing that you'll need to pay attention to if you ever look at the actual specifications for for CSS3 media queries, if you look at a site like this, it presents all of these media features as kind of standalone. That is, when we're looking at min and max, we have max width, and we have probably width in here somewhere, and we also have min width. And if you look at the actual specification, what you'll see is that there is no min width and max width, there is just a width, and that certain properties support the min and max prefix, and width and height is one of those, and there's a variety of other ones that do as well. And so if you look up in some documentation, you might not find min-width. You'll just see width, and then oftentimes it'll note somewhere in that documentation that this particular property supports min and max. Okay, this changes then the condition that we're creating, right? Just like when we think about using logical operators, less than, greater than, less than, equal to, greater than, equal to, not equal to, right? The condition that we use changes what we're actually asking. It changes when that condition is true or false. And these prefixes do the same thing for our media queries. If we have, for example, just width is 700 pixels, then this media query will only match when the width of the browser is 700 pixels, right? And that's very uncommon, because then what we're saying is that there's only one pixel in the width that we care about, which would be very, very hard for our device or for our design, our website, to be very responsive, because it would only adapt to that one particular case. And so it's much more common to see width, particularly with one of those prefixes, min or max, because min or max, those prefixes, changes that condition. Minimum width, we're saying it's 700 pixels or greater. Maximum width, so we're saying it's 700 pixels or smaller. And so we're creating more of a condition, in which case we're supporting a wider range of the actual dimensions, a wider range of the actual width for the browser. Okay, I won't use this too much in any of the samples here. Again, this is just an introduction to media queries, and so I want you to understand what they are, and we'll spend a little bit more time probably using Bootstrap as our way to do more responsive stuff. You may, as you start looking at it, particularly if you go down the path of web development, you may see when you start looking at other CSS, you may see things. You may see the only keyword. And the only keyword it's not only helps us to target a particular media device or media type, who say media only screen and max width, min width, whatever. It also helps to prevent backwards compatibility. And so we are concerned about some of those. Sometimes we're concerned about those older browsers that don't understand media queries. And a technique that has been developed is using the only keyword, and that is that older browsers, the way that they're processing the CSS, when they run across the only keyword, it hides the styles from being used by older browsers. It hides the rest of the rule, and so it can help with compatibility with those older browsers. I don't want to get too much in the details there, because it is kind of an in the weeds conversation, and that you're really getting into how the browser is parsing the CSS. I think it's good to understand, but we've got enough to cover right now. And so what I did was I provided a conversation on Stack Overflow about this topic that I think explains it pretty well. All right, so that's all we have for slides. I do have a sample file that I've uploaded to our course material sample code CSS. This is where it's located, and what we'll do is we'll take a look at the document, as well as we'll just run it through our browser here. So let's see, get that open. You'll notice that it is obviously a very simple document. I'm going to put my browser into responsive mode, and let's see here, let's select just one of these divs. Okay, I'm also going to change this just a little bit. Okay, so you'll obviously see here that as I'm changing the width, and the media features, the media queries are being detected, and they're changing behavior of this site. This is a very simple example, because right now I just want you to be able to get get an understanding of how to write them and how they're being applied via the browser. Understanding the syntax is the number one thing. So I don't want to do anything too complicated as far as the actual CSS or the document itself. Looking at this content here, you're seeing that it's obviously changing as I move the browser, as I change the width. The other thing that I want you to notice is that as you apply, or as you have your developer tools open and you select one of those elements, you'll notice here in the rules on the right hand side, and again, most developer tools show it here on the right hand side, we're seeing those things change. And so as you write the rules, and you're interested in understanding exactly, like say that you're trying to do some troubleshooting because your media query isn't working the way that you expect it to. One way to help is to select the element or elements that media query is applying to, and then look at this in here. So look at how the cascade, how those rules are being applied as you change the properties of your site, of your browser, in order to try to trigger that media query. And you can see that in fact is happening here. So let's take a look at that file. All right, as I mentioned before, I put everything in the head section here just so that we're not bouncing back and forth between two files. And I have a very, very simple document. So a body with 3 divs, and each div just has a little bit of content. Okay, as far as the rules go, rules are important. The order in which we define these rules are important. And so typically how you're going to see a document, how you're going to see CSS styled, is you're going to have your core rules defined here, and then you're going to start to see media queries. So what I have is I have a body selector, and the rule or the properties are that the color is green. And if we open this up, and well, it's hard to see that that's green, but that is green because I have a different rule there that's making that font size really small. And I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that because we don't really need it. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh that page. There we go. So now it's green. Okay, so the default here is for this to be green. I have additional rules then that I've written. And so we have media, screen, body, font size, 14. Okay, so that's really the same thing, right? I'm just showing here, in this case, that we have media, screen, and the rest of these have no media device because that's the default. I think it's, again, I think the default is all, but it's just eluding me at this point in time. Frustrating. So we could say screen, we could say nothing at all. And if I change that to nothing at all, body, font size 14, color green, we shouldn't see any changes here, right? And we didn't. Okay, here's one for media print. Right? And we're not using this one because we're not using a device for print. If somehow these style sheets were being applied to a device that does print, then maybe we'd want to do something different to support that printable feature. We'd want to make their font size bigger or something along those lines. So that's just simply the focus here. The purpose of this example wasn't that we were looking at printing, but just because this is targeting a different device, you're not seeing a font size of 30 pixels. We're seeing a font size of 14. Right? So this is not true because we're looking at this browser and it's matching on screen. Okay. All right, so now we have some rules that start to change some of those properties. So we say that the media, the max width is 300 pixels. Okay, and so what is that giving us? That's giving us the opportunity to say that the maximum width is 300 pixels. So from 0 up to 300 pixels, then it's going to change this. This is our selector. These are our properties. This is our rule. It's going to change the color to red. All right, and we have another one. This one's a slightly more compound condition. So we say the max width is 600 pixels and the minimum width is 301 pixels. All right, and so what is this doing? Well, this is more or less creating a range. It's saying that we have a maximum of 600, so it's got to be less than or equal to 600, and a minimum of 301. So it's got to be between 600 and 301 pixels. Right? So anything above that will have green, right? Because that's our default. Anything below 300 and below will be red, and then anything in between will take on a color blue. And if we go back to our site and we scroll through those breakpoints, we see, right? Less than 300 is red, in between is blue, everything above is green. Okay, so that's how we write the queries. And then inside of here, any CSS that we want to write, anything that we want to change, we can do here. Let's say that we want our, let's do this. This is a little bit more of a, let's say that by default, all of our, whoops, no, that's not what I want. Let's do this. Let's say that by default, all of our blocks are a display type of inline block, right? So what does that do? That gives our block, these are block level elements. Block level elements have a break before and after. If we say that they're inline block, then that makes them stack side by side, okay? And that's fine, because maybe we want that, because we're taking advantage of the fact that we have quite a bit of space horizontally. What happens then when we go to a more narrow design? Well, they don't start to break until the natural flow, the normal flow, causes them to break. Maybe that we want, whenever they're at a lower width, we want them to automatically stack. And so then we can write a media rule to say, all right, when you're not here, let's do it below. So let's say whenever you're below 300 pixels or below, your display is block level. And now if we refresh this page, what'll happen is that they'll stack, right? And that's what you see with something like a responsive design, is that you'll have elements that will lay out next to each other on larger features, like having a larger width, and then when they get more narrow, they stack, because we want things to stack and not go off to the side, or to stack in a way that looks good. Okay, a couple things I want to point out here, and then we'll wrap this introduction to CSS up. One is that there are multiple ways in which we can structure this CSS, right? What we want to try to do is we want to try to limit the number of media queries that we have, right? If we have 3 breakpoints that we're supporting, phone, tablet, and then above, we only want to have maybe 2 media queries at most. And everything, all of our rules, we want to be defined inside of that. Just like we did with this one here, we have one rule that looks for one condition, and then we have one query that looks for one condition, and then all the rules inside of that. And so we don't want to have a bunch of media queries littered throughout our CSS. We really want to keep that as minimal as possible. The other thing is the way in which we structure this. And again, we're going to talk more about this when we look at the Bootstrap framework, but I just want you to start to think about that now, is that oftentimes what you're going to see when you look at it, when you write your own, you're going to see this, that we don't just haphazardly throw media queries into our CSS. We design them with a very specific intent. And what you'll commonly see, and again, Bootstrap uses this, is that we'll have our default styles, and those default styles will support a mobile device, like a smartphone. And everything will be laid out, all the styles will be laid out to support that website when it's on a mobile phone. And we write media queries then to change that as we go to the larger breakpoints. And so you may have only 2 media queries. One that detects when when there's a minimum width of 500 pixels, let's say. So when we're on a tablet, and that'll be the next style, that'll be the next portion of our CSS document. Right? We'll have a media query right here. So we'll have a media query for tablets. And then all the rules that then support the change in the layout based off the fact that now our width is a little bit larger. And then we'll have one more media query, and that'll be for larger devices, i.e. laptops, desktops. Right? And then that'll change based off of that. And then that'll be the core of how the document is structured. Now, that CSS file might be 500 lines long or 1,000 lines long, but that's the basic structure here. Because the browser applies the styles. There's not only the style cascade that we talked about, but there's also the order in which it processes it. And so what happens then is if you define them in this order, if the browser is rendering this document, and it reads these and applies all these by default, and it's on a smartphone, then this query is not true and this query is not true. So there's no problems. If, let's say that they're on a tablet now, The browser will go through, it'll process all of these rules, it'll apply them, and now the media query for the tablet's true. So any of the rules that override those defaults will take effect because this media query was true. Okay, and then it'll look for larger devices, and it'll say, nope, that media query is false. And so we'll have a combination of these and these. If finally you have somebody looking at the site and they're doing it on a larger device, then we'll have these will be applied, then these will be applied, and then ultimately these will be applied, because this is going to be true, and then this is going to be true. And what we're doing then is we're structuring it away, because these are read last. These have essentially a higher order of precedence. They become ones that are applied because they were the last ones that were processed, if they override any of the previous features or the previous rules. So anyways, that's a little bit more, I guess you could say, advanced, right? I want you to think of that, be aware of it. We're not going to go too deep into the media query. The responsive stuff we're going to do is going to be using Bootstrap, and so it's going to make it a lot easier because it's a framework that allows us to get started and introduce the concept. So if that doesn't make 100% sense to you, I hope that's not the case, but don't be too concerned, because we're not going to create a lot of custom media queries in this course. It's an introduction, really. But certainly, if I've left you maybe a little confused or anything, please let me know, and we can talk about that. Or I can create an additional video or something. So that's it. That's media queries. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you guys in the next video, and we'll pick up with jQuery.